Okay, good evening, everyone. Thank you. Warm regards from Lima, Peru. I don't know why nobody's wanted to sit right near me up front here, but so be it. Very good. You get extra points for reading my weekly missives. There you go. See? So, it's an honor to sit here with all of you, and also with everybody in the web audience. Although here I can see your faces, and there I can't. I also want to say that this class is dedicated in memory and in honor of a father of a good school chum of mine that goes back many, many years. His name is Hillel Pevsner, who passed away this past week at the age of 87. And his son went to school with me from little age. So if you ever want to have any stories about me when I was more compromised, you could look him up. His name is Fivish Pevsner, and I think he's listening in. So it's an honor to dedicate the class to your father, and may his soul and the Torah that we talk about and study together be a good companion to his journey as he moves to the next leg and next stage of his soul's Odyssey, which is the theme of our discussion. It was actually not connected necessarily to this passing. The journey of life, the Odyssey of the soul. And the reason that I chose this topic is for those of you that are Torah scholars, or at least know the Parsha of the week. You know that this week's Parsha chapter that we read every week in the Torah, there are 52 weeks in the year. So corresponding to those 52 weeks, there are 52 chapters. Each chapter breaks into 7 sections. So in effect, every day of the year has a corresponding section of the Torah that we live with, and we read in that particular time. So this week's chapter is actually a fusion of 2 chapters. They're called Matos and Massei. It's the last 2 chapters of the 4th book of the 5 books of the Torah, the book of Bamidbar, the book of Numbers. So the last 2 chapters we read, and as you know, you may also know that the custom is that when we finish a book of the Torah, which means 5 times a year, the whole congregation, following the reader of the Torah, announces and declares out loud, Chazak, Chazak, V'nis Chazek, which means be strong, and be strengthened. And that's why we call the Shabbos also Shabbos Chazak, Shabbos of strength, and being strengthened. So the end of each of the books. One of the reasons for this is because the Torah is called Eitz Chaim Hi L'Machzikim Ba, that the Torah is a tree of life for those that hold on to it. And Machzikim comes from the word Chazak, holding on with strength. So it goes 2 ways. When you hold on to something that's valuable or eternal, you give it strength and it gives you strength in return, which is the double meaning of Chazak in that context. So we're in the 4th book, and the last chapter in other words, this dual chapter that we read is called Massei. Matos Massei. Massei literally means the journeys. Eila Massei B'nai Yisrael, the chapter begins, Asher Yotzu Me'eretz Mitzrayim. These are the journeys that the Jewish people took from the time that they left Egypt. And the chapter continues to enumerate 42 journeys, which means 42 stops that the Jews made from the day they left Egypt 39 years ago until the moment they came, this chapter, to the east bank of the river Jordan. So the journey from Egypt through the Sinai wilderness took 39 years and consisted of 42 steps, meaning 42 stops and movements, which altogether is captured in the one word Massei, which means the journeys. So therefore, in the spirit of what I always try to do at this class is discuss the personal relevance and the psychological and emotional message that each of us can take from these themes, and in this case the theme of these journeys. The reason I focus on that is because, being myself a graduate of the yeshiva system, which is going through the Torah system of studying in school, so I know that I know intimately well that often we learn much about the meanings and the commentaries on each word and each phrase and each expression in the Torah. And trust me, there are hundreds and thousands of commentaries, literally, starting from Rashi and the Ramban and others. And then there are commentaries on commentaries, on commentaries, on commentaries, and that's not an exaggeration. Because, Jews love to argue. So Jews have been arguing since the Torah was given at Sinai. And not only arguing, they're arguing about the meanings of these words. I mean, these are healthy arguments. And then they argue about what the meaning of the commentary is. And then there's the next generation argues about the commentary on the commentary. So you have layers and layers of discussions, all part of the rich process of what's called Torah scholarship, Torah literature, that you can spend your entire lifetime actually just reading few verses and just figuring out all the commentaries on those verses. That itself can take up a whole lifetime. So for all the beauty and the wisdom and even the profundity of these commentaries, there's also a certain downside. The downside is not the commentaries per se, God forbid, but the downside is that many people go away having such an education and they think that's it. Jews are smart. It's like legal debates. If you read the Talmud, these are legal debates about nuances and the details and expressions, and every letter in the Torah is pored over and analyzed again and again. And that's it. What's lacking, however, is the most important thing of all. What does it mean to me and you? Is this some type of academic exercise? You can go to Torah classes and go away perhaps inspired by the fact that Jews are dedicated to use their minds and try to analyze all of this, but you don't always go away with knowing what's the personal message. How is it going to help my marriage? How will it help me find my soulmate? How do I deal with psychological issues that I'm struggling with fears, inhibitions, insecurities? That's a whole different dimension, because the commentaries don't necessarily address that, at least most of them that we're familiar with. So, in effect, what happens is, and this is unfortunately part of the reality of the Jewish landscape today, that many, many Jews, even scholars, go away with a certain type of compartmentalization, which means when it comes to your religious life or your religious understanding of life, Torah scholarship, you can be well versed in all the commentaries and be a baki, meaning an expert and knowledgeable in all these areas. But when it comes to personal refinement, and what kind of mensch are you? What kind of human being are you? And what kind of life you live? And the personal, psychological, emotional issues that we all deal with, the Torah necessarily has nothing to say to you. Which is obviously quite tragic, because what ends up happening is, as I said, a compartmentalization where there are people who are great scholars, but they happen to be obnoxious human beings. And then, of course, from a secular perspective, when you see that, you start saying to yourself, what's going on here? I mean, I meet spiritual people who don't necessarily observant, but they're very refined. I meet Torah people, so to speak, Torah scholars, who know every Rashi and every commentary, every Ramban and Rashbam and Klei Yakar and so on, but you don't see necessarily impact that they are more refined, more sensitive. As a matter of fact, many people will say religious people are very condescending, very judgmental, elitist, and many other expressions. And this is not guesswork. I happen to know because I've been accused of this myself. As I said, coming from a world that if you look at my beard and yarmulke, you can imagine that I get the brunt of a lot of this, especially when you go out there into the so-called larger world, where people have many stereotypes and many perspectives, and it's extremely difficult to deal with a stereotype because people are convinced. This is the reason, and this is why I'm elaborating so much, why I focus in this class on one thing only. I'm not so interested You can go to other classes if you want to hear all the details of the commentaries and the counter-commentaries. They're all fascinating. But what I try to do is fill a void, which is, what is its relevance to our lives? Why should we be reading this stuff in the first place? So if your children ask you one day, or you ask yourself if you're an intelligent person, why am I committed to reading all this? Why are the Jews so adamant to fight for Torah, so to speak? You know, you hear stories, and they're not fairy tales, they're real stories. That when, God forbid, in the olden days, I'm not so old, just 50, 60 years ago, and people would attack Jewish towns and cities, and they would, God forbid, burn down synagogues. And the remaining Jews, with the last breath, would run into these synagogues and try to save the Torah scrolls. You have stories like this. And if you think about it, what's going on here? You know, if you're going into a burning building to save a child, God forbid, obviously you do anything to save a life. But a Torah scroll is just a book. It's just a scroll. You could always write another scroll. Why was it like such a people ready to sacrifice themselves not to allow a Torah scroll to be burned, to go down in flames? So the stereotypical response, especially the cynical one, is they're primitive people of faith who believe that the book has some type of power, some type of superstitious attitude. Obviously, it's built on ignorance. The fact is, because the Jews that did this did not see the Torah as a scroll. They didn't see it as a book, as yet another book that you could just write another one. They did see it as a life. And they referred to a verse, well, a statement we make in every evening prayer. In Ma'ariv, the evening prayer, we say, Torah is chayenu v'erech yamenu, that the Torah is our life and our sustenance. That's a very strong statement. You say life and sustenance on oxygen, on water, on bread, on food, on basic needs, on fundamental needs that a human being can't function without. To say the Torah is our life and our sustenance is essentially equating it with oxygen and water, which is what Rabbi Akiva actually said to the Roman skeptic, a philosopher, who said to him, why are you guys so adamant? Why are you Jews so adamant in your study of Torah? So you'll go with it without it for a few days. You won't live without it. What's the big thing? And he gave him the analogy, the famous analogy of the the fox who came to the riverside and called out to the fish and said, listen, you've been living in the water all the time. Maybe it's time for a change of venue and a little excitement. Why don't you come live on land for a while? I mean, it's just a metaphor. So please use your imagination. The fox probably wasn't actually speaking. He was getting the message across. And the fish said respond to the fox, they say you're such a wise animal. You don't understand, water for us is our sustenance. Coming out on land, obviously he was waiting to get a good meal. That's what he was trying. He wasn't really interested in their night out in the town. He was just interested in having a good meal. Instead of him going into the water, why don't they come out to him? And they said, you foolish fox, we need the water, it's our sustenance. We're not here because we're having a good time, it's our basic sustenance. Leaving here for a moment is impossible for us. And that was Rabbi Akiva's response. So if you read it on your own, and then you open up a Bible, or you open up a Talmud, or you open up most Torah books, and you say, where is the sustenance? How many people do you know that will open up a Torah and read it as they would read certain self-help books, or spiritual books, or poetry, or other books that speak to your heart and soul? How many people turn to the Torah when they have a issue with their spouse, or with their children, or with their parents? We wouldn't have any therapy if everybody was turning to the Torah. How many people? So you could say, okay, those that don't know Torah don't turn to it. But how many so-called observant people that will stand in the synagogue when the Torah is read on Shabbos and yell at anyone who's speaking in the middle of the reading of the Torah and want to follow every word, and they correct the reader of the Torah, and then you ask them, so tell me, what is the relevance of the message here? The best they'll be able to tell you is, I don't know what the relevance is, but I believe there's relevance. It speaks to my soul. But put it into words, and you won't have many people who can really answer that. Now, what is the message? What do you get from that? What happens? The message is very clear. The Torah is rendered irrelevant. So why is it called life and sustenance? It becomes it's a mystery. And it's a mystery why those Jews ran into the synagogues to save the Torah scrolls. So what I try to focus here is specifically on this and this alone. Not an analysis of the verses, which has its legitimacy, great legitimacy, but on its personal, psychological, emotional, and spiritual relevance. That Torah is not just another book, and it's not even just a book of inspiration. It actually is the blueprint of your soul. And your soul's life plays itself out in the Torah. Now, where do I get this from? This is not my own ideas. It comes from other commentaries, but these commentaries are lesser known. What we call it in Hebrew, primis haTorah, the inner Torah. So just like everything in life has an outer and an inner, like you have a body and you have a soul. A book has the letters, the words on the page, and has the message. Musical notes, if you look at them on the surface level, they're just notes. If you play them, they play music. So if someone didn't understand what musical notes are, they just look at them, they're gibberish. They mean nothing. What do they mean? Until you hear suddenly, it comes alive, you hear a symphony. Lifts your soul, transports you to another place. Suddenly you realize these aren't just notes, they're not just squiggly images on a piece of paper. They're a language that when you decipher it, plays music. The same is with the Torah. If you look at it on the surface level, which is called the outer dimension, the Nigla, the Tzenius, or the way the Zohar puts it. The Zohar is the classic work of Jewish mysticism. The Zohar will say that there's Galia Darai, which is the revealed part. So on the surface level, it looks like musical notes. It could be very profound. It can have all these, as I said, commentaries and explanations of turns of phrase, and why is this letter word used, and why is this word used, and all the connections and all the commentaries. But really, behind it all, there's also soul. And the soul is musical. It is music. And when you read it right, you'll hear the music. And when you hear music, music resonates. So then, the legitimate question that we should all be asking, and not just could be asking, but should be asking, every week, week after week, what is the message of this week's portion in my life? What's the music that speaks to my soul, that can respond to issues I'm struggling with? And you know, Shalas Chacham Chetzi Tshuva, they say, which means the question of a wise person is half an answer. If you ask the question, you're already halfway there. So the question is, who cares? Who cares that the Jews, 3,300, almost 3,300 years ago, traveled through the wilderness for 42 journeys that took 40 years? Who cares? I mean, it's nice to know from a historical point of view what our ancestors did. But why is it relevant right now? I mean, we have a lot of other things to deal with. For instance, Michael Jackson's funeral, or summer plans, vacation, and of course our own personal stuff, some of it more significant than others. I mean, everyone's got a whole list of to-do list. As I said, not all of it necessarily is critically important, but some of it is important. So where do you even have room or time to delve into and try to understand these journeys? So I said some people do enjoy, especially if they grew up with it, understanding the Parsha. It has a certain poetry to it, and you read the commentaries. But is that relevance, or is that habit? Is it academic exercise, or does it really have a personal message? And frankly, myself a skeptic, when I went through the yeshiva system, I could not accept that it was just this historical book, intriguing, even academically stimulating, but lacking personal relevance. Because then, in my mind, I said to myself, if that's the case, I mean, there are other books that are much more relevant. There are books on Lahavdil, as they would put it, on Buddhism, Far Eastern mysticism, other spiritual systems that speak, and you read it, it touches your soul and heart, and you do hear music. So initially, I was skeptical, and I wondered. But then there's another story of its own. It's not a press conference here, so I'm telling you my life story, which we can discuss, compare notes one day, if you like. We can have an open mic evening, group therapy. Maybe this is also group theory, but I'm only one guy that's talking. That's the only thing. Okay. So, through my own journey, no pun intended, I came to discover this inner dimension, and I realized that there is a fascinating body of work that actually does decipher these musical notes and turns it into music. And once I came to that epiphany, I realized that this was not just an optional thing. I guess I'm an extremist. If this is really so, then this is quite worth dedicating my life to helping others decipher it as well, which is why I'm here in the first place. So, I've stated my whole so-called mission statement of what drives me. But let's get over to the theme itself, the journey. And the challenge, as I said, is asking the tough question, why is this relevant to our lives? So last year I actually embarked on a journey of my own. The weeks prior to this chapter, I decided I write a weekly column that many of you get, and some of you read. I don't have one of these monitors that figures out like how fast someone deletes the email, or they even open it, or they open it and close it, all that. There are people who spend many hours. I guess I don't want to necessarily know, so I haven't worked that out. But practically speaking, last year I decided to, something I really tried to do 10 years ago, but it didn't really work. Some of you are familiar with my book that I did on the Omer counting, right? 49 days between Passover and Shavuos, which talks about is really essentially a system of personal character refinement that breaks into 49 steps. Each step deals with another part of the emotional spectrum of our lives. So around a little less than 10 years ago, around 8 years ago, I tried the same thing, these 42 journeys that the Torah elaborates upon, to figure out what is its personal message, each journey. And it's based on the principle that the Baal Shem Tov, some of you may have heard of the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of the Hasidic movement, himself a great mystic, and actually a great guide in the spiritual path of understanding Torah and Judaism in that spiritual, personal way. So the Baal Shem Tov says, an interesting statement, that the 42 journeys in this chapter, each of us will go through in our lifetimes. In other words, each of us have 42 stages of our life, from when we're born till the end of our lives, that included in these 42 steps. Now the thing is, the Baal Shem Tov doesn't spell them all out. He spells a few. So I decided to try to take upon myself the challenge to try to figure out what these 42 steps in our lives are. And I didn't want to just do it based on my own, whims. So I researched it, started looking at different sources, finding this, finding. I was able to put together maybe 10 of the 42. It wasn't enough, so let's put it this way, to announce writing a book or something. So I just nixed the whole idea, and I kept it in my archives and vaults on my hard drive. But last year, I was sitting like in a few weeks before this one when we start talking about these 42 journeys, and it was Thursday night, and it was getting later at night, and I had my deadline to finish writing my article, and I had nothing to write about. I wasn't inspired by anything particularly. It's called writer's block, but the clock is ticking. So I decided to go through some of my old files. I don't know why I'm sharing with you all these details, but why not? And I fall upon this project that I began so many years ago. And I said, you know what? Let me take the plunge. I don't have anything else to do. So let me figure out the rest of the 42. And I didn't know how I'm going to do it, but once I knew one thing is good, a good lesson in life is sometimes you just commit to something that's good, and then you're stuck, and you figure it out because you have no choice. It's a good idea, by the way, in case you suffer from procrastination or other things. It's good to commit to something and you can't get out of it because your pride or whatever it is, or you're stuck with somebody else. Good things I'm talking about, good habits, no good commitments. So that's what I did, and I actually wrote up last year. I went through every week another installment, and I got through the 42. Trust me, it was very difficult. Some of them I had no clue where to go. But when, as I said, Thursday night, and you're lonely sitting at a computer, at a monitor, and you have no choice, you figure things out. People figure things out when they're in a fix, So I'm not going to go through all these 42 right now because I did it in writing. And if you want to get those or haven't seen them, you can go to our website, meaningfullife.com. and just look up 42 journeys and you'll find the whole thing spelled out. But the reason I'm mentioning it is because I discovered fascinating, unbelievable, these 42 stages. They really reflect the stages in our lives. And it's interesting, all the stages, from ups and downs, from happy times to sad times, from spiritual times to mediocre moments, the whole spectrum, and all different stages. And if you look at it, you really see that it's fascinating how these 42 journeys suddenly come alive. And then it does matter what happened 3,300 years ago. You start saying, if these people, these Jewish people led by Moses, led by God, traveled through the wilderness, 42 steps, and those 42 steps are like 42 psychological stages in our own lives, and it's not forcing the issue. You really see that the names of the cities that they stopped, the names of the places they stopped at, what they did in each of these places, what happened, what transpired, which is really the story of 80% of the Torah are these 42 journeys. I don't know if you know that. But the Bible breaks into, as I said, 5 books. The first book is Genesis, which is mostly the story from Adam till Jacob and his children. But after that, after the first book, Exodus, the first book, Genesis, spans over a period of around 2,000 years. Then comes the book of Exodus. Once the Jews were enslaved in Egypt and they come out of that, which is the beginning of Exodus, the rest of the Torah, 4 books, focus on only 40 years. The 40 years from when they left Egypt until they arrive at the River Jordan before they enter the Promised Land. So it's pretty interesting that 4 books of the Torah are all about the journeys. And only 1 book really talks about the preliminaries before that. 40 years. So clearly these journeys are vital to understanding our own lives. And when you begin to understand these journeys personally, the Torah does come alive like music. Not always pleasant music, but definitely music that resonates. And it's fascinating because it teaches you about yourself, insights that it illuminates, that helps you make it through the journey of life. So here I will go over an overview of certain basic principles. And as I said, I'm not going to go through the 42 themselves. That you can look up because it's written and documented with sources on the website I mentioned. If you have difficulty finding it, just email me or my office and we'll send it to you. But let's talk a moment about this journey. And it's always good to begin with a few questions. It makes it more intriguing. So number 1 question, as I just said, it's interesting. You'd think stories about Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, the story of the Garden of Eden. Such a powerful story. Yet with all of that, the predominant story in the Torah is the journey. As I said, the journey out of Egypt, and then the 42 stages that they went through Sinai, and then the Sinai wilderness, and all the way till the end, when Moses dies and goes up on the mountain, the 42nd journey, when they arrive at the River Jordan on the east bank. Why is it so important that the Torah has so much focus just on these 40 years of all this journey? What's even more puzzling is this question. Moses does not end up entering the Promised Land. Neither does the entire generation that he was with. Everyone that left Egypt died in the wilderness for the reason that they sinned, the story with complaining when the scouts came back and told them that the Promised Land is not a good place to go to, too overwhelming. The only 2 people that will enter into the Promised Land that left Egypt would be two men, Yeshua ben Nun, Joshua, who would replace Moses and lead the Jews crossing the River Jordan, after the Bible, mind you, next book, after the Torah concludes, and Kalev ben Yefunah, the second of the scouts, those 2 who gave a good report and refuted what the other 10 scouts had said. So it's interesting. You know, usually books like to end on what they call happy endings. Even though it's become somewhat recently popular to have not such happy endings in movies and so on, but it's always with a risk, you may turn off the audience. The Bible has a very unhappy ending, if that's the case. Everything that everyone aspired to, from the beginning of time, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, all those promises that their children would enter the Promised Land, and it's all worth it, all the sacrifices, because we'd ultimately get the Promised Land. How many times does the Torah mention the Promised Land? hundreds of times. And Moses aspired to it, and the Jews aspired to it. And when they left Egypt, they were told that's where they're going. And that's why it was worth the suffering through 40 years in a uncivilized wilderness that was hostile to human civilization. All it was worth it to go into the promised land. And then you finish the book, and you don't even get into the promised land. That's like a pretty big shake of anyone that has faith. You'd say, okay, at least the last sentence, they crossed the river. No. The last sentence is that Moses, the man of God, the only one who ever saw God face to face, passes away. And the last words of the Torah are, and to the great Moses, a tribute to him, and to all the great miracles and wonders that he did, le'enei kol Yisrael, before the eyes of the Jews. That's the end of the Torah. And you have to read the next book, which is the book of Joshua, which of course doesn't even have the same impact and the same intensity as the Torah itself, meaning the 5 books of Chumash, to hear that ultimately they would enter the promised land. Now if you continue the story, of course, they stay there for a while, they build the temples, but they don't end up there either. Then comes the Babylonians and they destroy Temple 1, the Romans destroy Temple 2, and actually we're now in a period of the calendar where we honor that destruction. Last Thursday began what's called the 3 weeks. The 3 weeks, which will conclude in 2 weeks from now, with Tisha B'Av, the saddest day of the Jewish calendar. This is the saddest period of the calendar. We don't do weddings. We avoid unnecessary entertainment, etc., etc. Why? We're honoring the destruction and actually the exile of the Jews from the promised land. So we're back on the journey again. And this life is a journey. Collectively for the Jewish people, we've been traveling, not just traveling, being expelled, murdered, the whole journey of the last 2,000 years. So clearly there's something about this word journey, Massei, the word of this name, the name of this chapter, that has a profound lessons to us. And by understanding and paralleling our own lives with this journey, we not only come away with some hope, but also direction. So the first most important thing is to answer the biggest question of all. Why are we here? Why did our souls go on a journey from heaven, from the spiritual realms, and enter into this universe? Now, of course, that's based on the axiom and assumption that we are on a journey. Now, I can't go through all the axioms, so the first given that I am stating here is that we have arrived here from another place. Some of us relate to that very easily, and some of us maybe need proof. But I'm not going to go into the proofs. If you need proof, we'll have another class dedicated to that. So, assumption here is that each of us within ourselves has a spirit that is not confined by the material world and universe, and has traveled and journeyed into this world. Just to make it a little more palatable, if you need this, I'm often asked the question, and this is appropriate obviously for, God forbid, those that suffer losses and passing of fathers or mothers or other loved ones. Everyone always asks the question, where does a soul go to after a person dies? Everyone asks this question, children, adults, where does the soul go to? And it's not just an academic question. For people who suffer a loss, you want to know, where's that soul that you knew? Where did it go to? The body is buried. And what about the soul? So I always give the same answer. I mean, I don't want to call it a humorous answer, but I use it by analogy. The question itself, what the mystics will say, is based on a very false assumption. It's even an arrogant assumption. And that assumption is that I am where it's at, which means we are here where it's at, and we're asking, where does the soul go to? As if it's like we're the given, and the soul, we have no idea where it went to. So to use a so-called imaginary dialogue between, let's say, an air conditioner and electricity, okay? So this is a dialogue between air conditioner and electricity. And when they pull the plug from the air conditioner, so the air conditioner says to electricity, where do you go to when the plug is pulled? And the electricity replies to the air conditioner or to the appliance, what do you mean where I go to? What kind of chutzpah is that? kind of arrogance is that? What do you mean? I've always been around. You're just around 100, 200 years. Someone invented you. They built this box. You learned how to generate some electricity, confine it in this box, and because of whatever the technologies, it's able to cool hot air. And now you ask me where I go to? I go back to where I always was, my natural place, which is not confined in boxes like you. Where did you come from? That's the question I have. In other words, to make a statement in this world, in our perception, and say, where does the soul go to after a person dies, is the same thing. We're a limited box existing on this plane, and all we really know, we don't even know what's going on inside the box, let alone outside of the box. Even though we like to say to think out of the box. But even in the box, ask a doctor. How much do we really know about the human body? I'm not even talking about soul now. Body. Yes, we know much. Much progress. We could heal people in ways we couldn't heal once. The life expectancy is amazing, and developments continue to unfold. But at the same time, we also know, as much as we know, there's so much more to know. As a matter of fact, the more you know, the more you know how little you know. Take issues of fertility. I'm not even talking about the human brain. How much of the human mind do we know? This little mind that's the size of the palm of a hand. So any doctor who's not arrogant and is humble and honest will tell you. What we know, we know. There are things we know, we've proven, but there are also exceptions, and there's some mysteries we will never understand. This is not trying to suggest that we're ignorant. It's just trying to understand that there's a certain awe and humility necessary in the body of knowledge, even about this little box called the human body, which is 5-6 feet tall, 100, 200, whatever amount of pounds. We won't go into details. But it's quite limited. And this box, what do we really know? So for this box to suddenly make a statement like the air conditioner, where does the soul go to when we separate, is really based on a very narrow-minded and very limited assumption. The soul is on a different plane, and that's how the mystics put it. That the soul, like electricity in a way, exists in its own spiritual dimension. And at some point, which is a discussion of its own, why it happens, when it happens, that soul begins a journey. Specifically the word journey. From the spiritual plane, it will enter into a seed that has been fertilized, which is you and I, but the soul enters, and the physiological and spiritual growth of a fetus, which will become a child and a life, begins. The journey begins before the seed is the conception, before the seed is fertilized. The journey begins when the soul begins its journey and on its own trajectory. I'm using that word, so that's insider's joke. And it begins when that decision is made, that the soul begins that journey. And the journey, as I said, enters the body begins to grow as the soul does. They get to know each other. And after 9 months of pregnancy and gestation, a child will emerge from mother's womb, not just a body, but a body with a spirit, a live human being. It still has much to develop. We don't see in a child all the potential. The child doesn't speak yet, at least not in our language. The child doesn't do a lot of things, but everything that will happen with this child's life is there in a microcosm. And then it will grow and expand as all of us. And now we're here, these adults sitting around who think that they have it all figured out, or maybe not, and asking where souls go to. And that's our life. But the critical word here, the operative word, is journey. Understanding that this is a journey is a vital, vital element. Because it's not just semantics. It changes everything. Most of us see our lives, we think of our lives very much in called analog form. You know, you're here, I'm doing this now, tomorrow another thing, another thing. It's a bunch of disjointed pieces. We don't necessarily see the continuum, which is essentially what a journey means. A journey means you came from somewhere, and you're going somewhere, and you're in between. And every step, every breath you take is part of the journey. How many people really think of their lives that way? Very, very few. We're not trained to think that way. It makes sense once you hear it, and it resonates, and it's in a way very beautiful. But our psychological makeup is not that way. We live for moments. Why is that? That could be analyzed. It could be because as we grow into adults, that's what was projected upon us. Figure out what to do right now, because you don't know what's coming tomorrow. We're not necessarily educated and informed that type of philosophical perspective that your life is a journey and that you're coming from somewhere and you're going somewhere and what are you doing with every moment. It could be instant gratification and momentary pleasure becomes a dominant force in our lives. Even though intellectually we may understand that there's a continuum, but how many people actually live like there's a continuum? Things really bother you. Something happens in your life, God forbid, that's sad. You lose something. You don't think, oh, this is a journey and that tomorrow things are going to be better and in a few days better. You get consumed and overwhelmed with the moment. You have a moment of temptation. Everything disappears. You will do things that are completely irrational. And you may even know you're doing it irrationally, you'll still do it. And then later you may regret it and you'll do it again. Explain that. So there's many ways to analyze it psychologically, and I don't know if we have the night for that, why we're that way, but there's no question people live that way. Interestingly, or even paradoxically, when we do suffer and we lose something, we're usually more open to understand that life is a journey. But when things are going well, oh no. You show me someone that is prospering and everything is going well and they really see their life as a journey. They're happy now, they don't really care. One of the Rebbes told a person who had a great loss, financial loss, he said to him, life is a galgal hachezer, a Ferris wheel, a turning wheel. What's a turning wheel? Right now you're down below, and then the wheel continues to turn, and it moves upward. And then when you're on top, don't forget it's also a wheel. The wheel's not only when you're on the bottom, and it will turn again. Obviously, God should be merciful, and the bottom shouldn't be so bottom, and that the setback shouldn't be so intense. But a wheel it is. There's no human being on this earth that's immune from ups and downs in life. It's very attractive. Animal bliss is very attractive. As a kid, I remember going up to the mountains and always very amazed and intrigued by the cows that would graze in the meadows on the sides of the highways. And you always wonder, like, what do they have any concerns in their lives? They don't go to therapy, no complaints. They could just literally for hours munch on grass. You never see them getting anxious, unless there's an enemy or something, but it's very rare. And it can become, once you have enough anxiety in your life, it's very envious to be like a cow like that for a while. I just speculate, however, that if you end up stuck there, you may not want to stay for too long, because that's part of it. I guess if you have the bliss, it wouldn't bother you. But this is strange human beings. When we're too much at peace, we have angst while we're too peaceful, So it's healthy to have some balance in between. But the fact is the human being, each of us, is a wheel, and we are on a journey. And studying this is the single most important principle when you study mysticism. When you start studying any spiritual system for that matter, but especially Jewish mysticism, you'll always see the focus is, the expression is Yeridas Haneshama B'guf. The soul came down into a body. I remember hearing from a man, he's a rabbi in Nashville, Tennessee, an older man now, he's in his late 80s, I think. Rabbi Posner is his name. And when he was a young student in yeshiva in the 1940s, he told me the story. He said he once went into the previous Lubavitch Rebbe, who was himself a person in a wheelchair at the time, could not speak clearly because he had suffered from a stroke, had other illnesses, diseases, but he was alive in the fullest sense of the word. And he says, I was just a student, I was like 16, 17 years old, and the Rebbe had suggested, this was like 1947 or 48, that I go to Chicago for the summer to visit the communities and inspire Jews, study some Torah, give a class, speak for them, offer them books and stuff like that. For a spiritual inspiration. And the Rebbe, he says, sensed that I was hesitant, because I'd never done anything like this. I didn't know if I could do it, if I'm even made out for it. And he said the Rebbe, it was difficult for him to speak. So to really appreciate what he said, you had to look also at his hand movements. He would use his hands to emphasize his words. So this is what he told me, I remember. And the way he said it, you could see he was going back to that moment when he was 17. That's interesting when a person tells a story, you see literally how they go back 40, 50, 60 years in time. Like they're living it as it's happening. And he said, so the Rebbe said to me, in Yiddish, I'll translate it. The Rebbe said to me, when a neshama, when a soul has to come down to earth, it doesn't want to go. Why? Because in heaven, where the soul hangs out, its habitat, he says, is warm und lichtig. It's warm and illuminated. And down on earth, it's cold and dark. So why should a soul want to come from an illuminating, warm place to a cold, dark world? A hostile world. And the Rebbe spoke very deliberately, he spoke very slowly, and he said, so what do? How do you get a soul, how do you force a soul out of its comfort zone from a light, illuminated, warm place into a dark, cold world? So the Rebbe continues, he says, you command the soul, they command the soul that you must go down. You have no choice. And he said the Rebbe took his hand and said like this, and his hand was trembling a bit, and he said, they tell the soul that you have to go down. And he did like this. And Rabbi Jacobson was doing it as he was speaking, exactly as it happened. He says, I was looking at the Rebbe's hand going down, and I felt like my soul was going down. He says, you go down there where it's cold and dark, and you know what you do? And then the Rebbe used his hands like this and said, you illuminate and warm this cold and dark place. He did like that. And that was it. Which was essentially the message. You go to Chicago, wherever you're going to go in your life, and it's not always going to be warm and illuminating. Know you're on a journey and you were sent there, but you have to go, and you have a job. You have a mission. And the mission is to illuminate and warm that place. And he said to me, with tears in his eyes, he said, you don't know how many times, whenever I was like in difficult moments, and who doesn't have difficult moments, I just remember the finger, and then the light and the illumination. And it gave me a little strength. Doesn't mean it solved the problem, but those little things can make a difference in that moment when you need it. So the perspective of actually seeing your life this way changes everything. You're not a victim of circumstances. You're not just here, you fell on this earth, and that now you got to figure it out. You were sent here. Your soul was sent here. You have a mission, and a mission implies a journey and a destination. You start here, and you were sent here. Why? So generally speaking, yes, for all of us to illuminate and warm our environments. But that doesn't require 6 billion people on this earth. The fact that you and I are here, each of us individually, means that you have a particular way to illuminate and warm your environment in a way that I cannot, and others cannot. In other words, you have your indispensable musical note that you have to play. This is not an option. This is the reason you were sent here. Everything else is secondary. This is your journey. And you will go through 42 steps of this journey. Some of them will be easier, some will be harder. As I said, each one of these 42 that are spelled out in this chapter, talk about those. Some of them talk about very difficult times. The names imply great challenges. Times where you feel all is lost, you have no strength left, hopelessness. That too is part of the journey. And the journey never stops. It's like the wheel that I was saying. This isn't, as I said, just words. It takes time to assimilate this concept, but if you begin to live this way and think this way, trust me, it changes your life. Not in dramatic firework way, in a subtle way. It's perspective. It's you wake up in the morning differently. Well, I would submit that even though no business can function without a mission statement, the question is how many of us have personal mission statements? And if a business can't function without one, obvious question is how can you? So maybe not such a comfortable question, but you didn't come here to be comfortable, I hope, right? So it's not such a comfortable question because you start wondering, okay, what is my personal mission? So most of us, and I've tested this many times with myself and with others, will say, my mission is to be happy. My mission is to be productive, to build a family that is healthy and will be productive. For some, they'll say, my mission is to be a devout, observant Jew and make Jews proud. To be a person that serves others. that gives? There's a lot of answers to this question. Some more generic and more platitudes than others. But when you talk about business, a mission statement, it's not enough to say, my mission in this business is to make money. That would be the equivalent of saying my mission is to be happy. Every business is supposed to make money. Microsoft's mission statement is a computer in every home and in every office. And Google's is to organize all the information of the world and make it universally accessible, something like that. I don't know the exact wording. These are real missions. This is not just to make money. This is a way to make money. So for us, the equivalent, your mission has to be something that is as unique as these missions to you and not to someone else. It has to fit your skills and tools. You can't say, for example, my mission is to land on the moon, as they did 40 years ago, when you're not even in that position and you never will be. So it has to fit your reality, and it has to, above all, you have to have the tools to be able to achieve it. It can take many years to discover a personal mission. But the personal mission goes hand in hand with your personal journey. In the Torah, the entire Torah, as I said, is mostly about this journey. So some say the destination is the journey. It's not about where you would reach, it's about getting there. Which you can say is supported by the fact that the Torah never concludes with entering the promised land. But it's interesting because the promised land was the prize and the destination. What does this mean in personal psychological terms? It means each of us has a promised land that we are driving towards, that we were sent toward. However, to get there is not just about a treasure hunt, of figuring out the fastest steps to get there. You have to do things in your life to get it. You have to earn it, basically. It's not just a reward at the end of the light at the end of the tunnel. It's part of, we build our promised lands, basically, with what we achieve in our lives. It's like they say about heaven. I don't know if you've ever heard this, but heaven, from a Torah, Jewish perspective, is not a reward that you get as a result of what you did. Heaven is what you build in your life. Every time you do a good deed, an act of virtue, you've built a little building block. And all of them accumulatively is called heaven. So it's not like some disconnected thing. It's a direct result. It's cause and effect, basically. Jews believe in the concept of Mashiach, Geula. We say 7 of the 18 prayers in Shemoneh Esrei are all about the final destination, the final redemption. It's interesting. 18 to Shemoneh Esrei. There's only one prayer dedicated to healing, one to parnasa, to livelihood, one to have seichel, das. And 7 are dedicated to something that's so esoteric that most of us have never seen it. Well, none of us have seen it. Something about the future, the Messianic age. 7 out of 18, that's interesting. The answer is because that's the destination of the journey. What it means, the destination? That it is a direct product of what we do. See, the Jews do not believe in the Messianic age is some type of event. It's an event, but more importantly, it's a process. There are those that see it as an event. Something will happen. Some miraculous thing will happen. Or whether it's an apocalyptic event or a peaceful event. For Jews, it's a process. Every good deed that was ever done from the beginning of time was part of a marathon, part of a journey. And that piece was put into place, so even when that person died, that piece never disappears. And as all these building blocks are built, accumulatively it adds to a different type of world. The world that we create, the high level of technology that we have today, even a form of unity that is unprecedented, religious freedoms, many of the great achievements of our time that our parents and grandparents could only have dreamed of, is very messianic, but is a direct result from a Jewish mystical perspective of a journey that began long ago. When you have rewards in your life that you're able to sit here and you can make choices in your life today that our grandparents could not make because they were persecuted and killed for their beliefs, it's not just some fluke. It's the prices they paid in the earlier stages of the journey that allow this stage of the journey, meaning ours, their children, to reap the rewards. The concept of what's called the midget on the shoulders of the giant. That we are not people in a vacuum. We are a product of a process. And each generation carries the baton to the next level. That's in a collective sense. And on a personal sense, each of us has our own mini journey. And it's all a bunch of pieces that if you look at it from a naked eye, it's very disjointed, doesn't seem it makes any sense. But if you step back and if you have a trained eye, you can see the journey, you can see the process. You can see that they're all basically, think of it like frames in a film that is still unfolding. Kierkegaard wrote that you can only understand your life backwards, but you have to live your life frontwards. So we live our life frontwards in the frames, this frame, tomorrow will be another frame. And then you look back at the things that have happened already, and if you have that ability to, and humility, and ability to look at a bigger picture, you can connect dots and see the forest from the trees. And even the saddest moments, even things that completely did not make sense at the time, can be understood in retrospect. Some things may not be understood. We may never understand why a Holocaust took place, or why there are personal Holocausts that people have to endure even today. We don't have to understand everything. That doesn't make the journey less of a journey. Not every leg of the journey we'll never understand why some of us had to go through certain things and others through other things. But never mistake the fact that you are on a journey. As I said, this is an assumption that I'm stating because without it, obviously all of what I'm saying doesn't have any value. But think about it. Think of being able to create a mindset where your life has a beginning, a middle, and a destination. And that it's something that continues from those that came before you, which means you continue the journey of your parents, even dysfunctional parents, I should add, because you can heal what they did not. I just had a situation, unfortunately more than one, but just recently comes to mind. Of course, everyone has the issue that we usually repeat the patterns that we picked up when we were children. And as much as you want to run away from it, you become more like your mother than you ever wanted to be, or more like your father than you want to be. And some of us are running the opposite direction, but that too is a product of them. That's why you're running the opposite. So one way or another, we're haunted. And some will argue, and I've heard this many times, and one story I was about to tell you, well, it's not really a story, but what happened was, of course, a similar situation growing up in a home. The father was a very angry man, a lot of rage. And this fellow that I'm talking about, obviously, developed the same rage. He learned that's the coping skill you do when you're upset. You get angry, and you're abusive to others, verbally, even physically sometimes. And he felt trapped. As much as he acknowledged the problem, he felt this is something I cannot change. It comes from my childhood, from my earliest years, formative years. This is what I saw in my home. As much as I hated it, as much as it destroyed my life, I'm becoming a monster like my father has become. And he's going to different types of therapy. Some even confirmed it and said it's true. You really can't escape it. You can control it somewhat. You can get out of the house when you're in that mood. There's some behavioral things you can try. And he came to speak to me a while ago. And it was a pretty tough situation. And I'm not by no means a professional like the professionals were. But one thing I could tell him that they didn't tell him was, I said, look, I was not trained or did not come from a persuasion or a school of thought that things are doomed. Just because you're the child of an angry, abusive man, you have to become an angry, abusive man. I know there are people that argue that once you've been shaped, that's forever your destiny. It's not where I come from. I come from a world where I was taught that a soul is immune to these factors. And it could be trapped in a body that is being controlled by your rage and by your other dysfunctional tools, but you have a soul, and if you can access it and realize it came on a journey, and the journey includes going through a home that you lived in, you can remedy, you can heal that which was not healed, and you can change the course of history, which means you can have children that will not be like your father was or like you have become. I said, blind people, God forbid, 2 blind parents will have children that see. It's not the destiny of children of blind people to become blind. It's true, it may be genetic, there may be certain flaws of the eye structure that can be passed on, but most cases of blind people, even born, children will see. Why? Because sight doesn't come from the eye itself. There's also a power of sight. So even if the container, so to speak, the body part is damaged, the power to see is still there, and that's passed on to children. Not every handicap. That's even a genetic handicap, let alone a thing like anger, which is definitely not nature, it's nurture. To his credit, and I don't know really where he got the strength, I mean, I would argue with him all the time, because he would constantly have setbacks as much as he tried. I said to him, look, my suggestion is not to go fight your rage, because you can't fight fire when it's burning like out of control. What are you going to do? It's controlling you, so how can you control it? I said, you have to, in times of calm, when you're not so angry, and when things are going more or less in equilibrium, you have to reinforce your soul. You have to start doing things that feed you, nourish your soul. You make your soul stronger, you'll see that the other part of you will become weaker. That's the method. If you don't, you will become a victim to it again and again. To his credit, he went to Israel, signed up for some intense program. It wasn't equivalent of a rehab program, but almost as intense, of a real soul awakening. And he's a new person. And I asked him recently, I said to him, you still get angry at times? He said, sometimes. But it's a whole new world. I have another resource that I can access, which I never had. And that's what I access. Sometimes it's not easy. But it's a whole, I could see immediately it's a different person. Even when he's not angry, you can see he's different. There's a whole new, it's like tools, new tools that you learn. And it all came down because he understood at some point something hit him, that he is on a journey. And what another thing that added to him was actually he was, I don't know the word excited, but he was driven by fixing something that was broken. His father was broken, and he almost became completely broken. And he determined not to do it, and not to stop it right here. To nip it, stop it where it is, and not allow it to move on to the next generation. See, that's a journey that is worth discussing. Unfortunately, sometimes it doesn't always take a turn like that. It can take the opposite turn. But the attitude to study this chapter again and again, and even just that statement, that this is the story of your life. So when you read this verse, Eila Massei b'nei Yisrael sheyatzu me'eretz Mitzrayim. So the commentaries ask the question, I wasn't going to mention commentaries, but I can't do without one. I did, after all, go to yeshiva. So the commentaries ask, these are the journeys of the Jewish people, children of Israel, that when they left Egypt. The question is, they only left Egypt one journey, was the first journey. They left Egypt, and they went to Ramses l'Sukkos. That was the first of the 42. Why is the Torah suggesting that all the journeys are going out of Egypt? That's literally what it means. As if all 42, and only the first one was out of Egypt, and then the rest were the subsequent journeys until they got to the border of Israel. And they answer, a fascinating answer, because all 42 journeys are all part of the process of getting out of your own personal Egypt. What is the word for Mitzrayim, for Egypt in Hebrew? Mitzrayim. As you know, Mitzrayim doesn't mean just a country called Egypt. Mitzrayim means limitations, literally boundaries, Meitzar and Gvul. All the constraints, inhibitions, limitations, fears, insecurities, whatever form or shape it takes that inhibits you, that limits you, is Mitzrayim. Just that translation, which is actually the word Mitzrayim, changes the whole relevance of the Torah to our lives. Why is it so important, for instance, to remember that we left Egypt? Do you know how many mitzvahs and do you know how many prayers are dedicated just to remembering we left Egypt? Like one guy said to me after reading, enough with Egypt. We left Egypt thousands of years ago. How many times can you mention it again and again? Why do we have to live in this past? And the Torah says, the Talmud says, in every generation you have to envision as if you left Egypt. This is even every day of the year, let alone Passover, the Seder and the whole Passover experience. All about recreating, leaving Egypt, leaving. How many people were in Egypt in the first place that you could say have to envision we left Egypt? So yes, our parents were enslaved. They were then freed, and now we're free people. It's nice to remember once a year. You commemorate what happened. But there have been a lot of other problems since. Why is this Egypt such an obsession in Jewish life? Zeichel Yetzias Mitzrayim. Even the 10 Commandments. I am your God. So you think that created heaven and earth. No. That took you out of Egypt. Again and again and again. Tzitzis, tefillin, mezuzah. Almost all the mitzvahs have some connection to Mitzrayim. But when you understand that the word Mitzrayim is not just some country called Egypt, and the leaving of that country, Exodus, is not just something that happened 3,321 years ago, but it's something that's happening right now, and it's actually the thing that all of us aspire to most. In one word, it's called transcendence. To transcend whatever it is that's trapping you, the tentacles, whether it's psychological, internal traps, whether it's outside traps, within or without. We have Mitzrayims all around us and within us. If you think of it then, in those terms, then how many times mentioning it is never enough. It's the challenge of our lives. And each of us has our own Mitzrayim right now, and it takes on different shapes and forms. And the key to know is that you have the power to travel out of it, to leave it, to journey. And all the 42 journeys are all meant for achieving one purpose, and that's why the Torah says these are the journeys, not just the journey, the first. All 42 are about transcending from the limitations of our lives and recognizing that you are on this journey, your soul is traveling, is the key to understanding that way to free yourself. That means there's nothing in life, literally nothing, not the best of times and definitely not the worst of times, that is your destiny. You're in movement. You're a mobile entity that is on the move. And you're constantly traveling. And the journey began long before you were here and will continue long before your body will not be here. And it's one long journey if you connect to it. Or we have the choice to just live in the moment, make believe that there's no before, there's no after, and your life becomes a hodgepodge of disjointed fragments. And from time to time, it wears you down, and then you try to figure out, make some sense of it, until you get back into a complacent mode, another comfort zone. And then the years roll on, and the next thing you're playing golf, and now you don't have the time or the memory to think about it. This guy used to go in this small town. Every day he used to go to the river bank, and he would go fishing. Fish. And he has like a tranquil moment in his life. Every day he would go for an hour or two, catch some fish, meditate, very peaceful. Come home, cook some of the fish, he had his meal, and his content life. One of his neighbors, one of the people in town who used to observe him, comes over to him one day and says, I'm watching you day after day. You go fishing, very peaceful, very tranquil. I see you catch fish. I want to make a proposition to you. My proposition is, I'll invest money, I'll go into business with you, and we'll buy a boat, we'll rent a boat. You'll go out with me since you have the good technique, and we'll go to the deeper waters and we'll catch better fish. And then we'll sell some of the extra fish. You'll have what you need, sell the rest, and make some profit. So this guy says, and then what? He says, we'll make enough money, we'll buy a bigger boat, and then we'll hire a few fishermen. Under your guidance, we'll catch even more fish. We'll make even more profit. And he said, and then what? And then what? We'll buy a fleet. And we won't even have to go out there. We'll have people we train. They will catch it. We can do other things. And we'll have a lot of money after a while. And he says, and then what? It's a journey. He says, and then what? Then we'll retire and we'll go fishing. That's what he said to him. So of course he answered, well, I am fishing and I'm at peace. What do you want from me? But this is unfortunately the sad part of the life. I used to remember as a kid in yeshiva, I used to go to a pizza shop. So there was this baker from Romania used to say to me, I would always ask him, how are you? And he would say to me, what can I tell you? You spend half your life making money and the other half spending it on doctors. It always remained with me, this wisdom of life. I know these little statements sometimes have more depth to them than you think. So the point I'm making here is we are very mobile human beings, right? And we have mobile technologies as well, the latest thing in life. On the move. You can be anywhere, connect to anything. They say the dream of getting any piece of information anywhere, anytime. Those of you remember Dick Tracy, who was a little watch that he had. He was able to access everything. So we're almost there. You'll be able to have a computer the size of a watch, combined with television technology, combined with computing technology, and telephone technology, and that's all you need. Right? Yet the question is, how happy are we? Are we happier than our parents were and grandparents? And I just came back, you talk about Lima, Peru, so the conference was on happiness. So those of you who read what I wrote, one of the interesting things I heard in this, I mean, I was myself and a man called David Fishman, who I met there. And he shared an interesting statistic. The statistic was, which I wrote about, if you read it, you'll know what I'm referring to, that Denmark, studies showed, has the highest rate of happiness, happy people. Denmark. And there are different theories why and stuff like that. They have a lot of healthcare kids interested. Since healthcare is in the news. Others have other theories. And this guy's, David Fishman's theory was that, but I actually made a mistake. I wrote age 10, corrected me. At age 20, in the Western world, let's say in the United States, the average 20-year-old has seen 1 million advertisements by the time you're age 20. 1 million. And that's not surprising. We're talking about everything, from billboards to internet to television, every image and so on and so forth. And in Denmark, interestingly, for whatever reason, I don't know if it's intentional or not, has the lowest rate of public advertising. There are very few billboards and very few public ads. So what he was suggesting was the more you see, the more miserable you become. Because you see all these things you don't have. Or you covet and want to have it, and you can only get part of it. And the more of it, the less happy you are. So it's an interesting twist of everything. That means essentially that our prosperity and our so-called gifts, that we can get anything, anytime, may actually be our undoing. May be the cause for our misery. And I have no doubt there's a truth to that. We still believe prosperity is a blessing. We still believe that everyone should be blessed with everything. But if you don't have context, there's no question that the more you have, the more it can destroy you. And you see it all the time. The biggest wars are fought by families that have wealth. That's how it is. Statistics show that anyone that made a lot of money, by the time the grandchildren come, they either don't talk to each other, or they all blew it, or both. Very rare instances that it's otherwise. And the fact is, all of us would love, of course, that test and say, give it to me and I'll worry about it then. But the biggest key thing to remember of all, that happiness has nothing to do with what you have or how much of it you have. It has a lot to do, not a lot, I would say everything to do with this journey that I'm discussing here. If you know you're on a journey and you know that every step of your life is connected to that journey, and it doesn't stop you from being driven and being as successful as you want to be, but always remembering with a little humility that whatever happens, it's still part of your journey, whether it works out or doesn't, is a very freeing, a freeing concept. It's a freeing concept because it puts you in the mode of realizing that you've been put here and that you didn't put yourself, and that you are part of a process that you can either choose to resist or choose to embrace. And it's not just embracing someone else's calling the shots. No, the journey is you're a partner in it. God could send you and put you into all kinds of different situations, but what you'll do with it is completely up to you. So it's not just a journey someone just threw you a certain direction. That's called hashgacha pratis, divine providence. Or in the words of King David, Hashem mitzad gover keinanu, which means God leads the footsteps of a human being. Yeah, but what you do with those footsteps and what you do when you get there is completely up to you. That's why the journey has a certain more complexity to it than it seems. And usually a journey is, okay, you're on the road and there you're going. Here you actually determine what happens at each stage, whether you'll see it as a journey or not. Imagine every situation you find yourself. You say to yourself, this is an opportunity, a spiritual opportunity. Good business people see everything as a business opportunity. What I'm adding here is that it's a spiritual opportunity for you to learn something, for you to achieve something, for you to give, for you to, as I said earlier, illuminate and warm that particular part of your life. This all requires, however, as I said, a mindset. It requires a an attitude that begins from the moment you're born, but from the moment you awake. That you wake up in the morning and you say that one-line prayer that I often suggest people should say, Moda'ani, which means I acknowledge that you return my soul to me. What do you think you're really saying? You're saying, I acknowledge that I'm on a journey, and the journey continues for another day today. And I thank you for that. It's a whole different way of looking at your day. It's not just what business appointments you had that day and what goals you're going to achieve. That's all fine and good. But above all, and the undercurrent of it all, is that your journey continues. Your soul's journey. And the question is, how are you going to utilize this day to fulfill that part of your journey? Now, this doesn't necessarily minimize, for someone who has lost a close relative, the pain. Just knowing that the soul continues on its journey. Yes, it's comforting to know that at least, that the soul did not die, and it's only the body that did. Or better put, but what died was the severing of the body and the soul. And it's good to know, like electricity, that it goes back to its own place. But it's still painful because you don't have a connection to that place. Which is why we do things. In Jewish tradition, we give tzedakah, charity, and we build physical monuments in a way, physical institutions in the memory of that person. It's not just a memory thing. It's almost like continuing to channel the soul into this physical world. That's really what it means. Because Jews don't believe in memorials as in dead memorials or inanimate ones. It's in the actions that we do. It's in the things that we build are in the spirit of the people that were here before us. What do you think is the ultimate revenge after the Holocaust? Ask most Holocaust survivors. They'll tell you. They'll point to their children and their grandchildren. It won't be building an army and getting even with the Germans or bombing their cafes. It will be what we invest in the future. And no matter how painful it was, Holocaust survivors will tell you, I know that the losses of my brothers and sisters and my parents, or whoever was taken, I have an obligation to replace them, basically. Not just replace them physically, but to replace their spirit, that my children and grandchildren should continue what they could not continue. This is, in other words, a journey. In other words, even the darkest of moments, perhaps, in all of history, definitely collectively and personally, the Holocaust, it too is part of a journey. That doesn't mean, as I said earlier, that it's explicable or we can understand it or we will ever understand it. But that doesn't take away that we move forward and we will not remain trapped there. Yes, there are people who live their lives obsessed with anti-Semitism. But you'll see, most of the Holocaust survivors, you'll see others, what they're obsessed with is succeeding and continuing the journey. Because when those Jews marched to the gas chambers, and I've mentioned this many times, I recently asked my friend Eli Wiesel whether he remembers it. He didn't remember it because people who were alive were usually separated from those that went to their deaths, so they didn't really see what was happening, even though they knew. So it was reported that Jews sang Ani Mamin, some of them. They would sing. That I believe in complete faith in God, and though you tarry, though you delay, they believe the Mashiach's coming. You think about it, even if they're not a skeptic, it sounds odd with such humiliation and such a dehumanization and all that they went through. You'd think that they'd all be extremely angry at God, and I'm sure many are and were and are. And definitely not say Shema Yisrael or Kaddish or sing complete faith. Not that everybody sing, no, but there were those that did. And they were not insane, and they were not desperate, and they thought that that's it. It was because they were saying, essentially, we're on a journey. And you can take our bodies, but you can never take our souls. You may kill us, but you will not kill our faith. You may kill us, but you will not kill our next generation. And if it won't be us, it will be the next. And if it won't be them, it will be the next ones. There's no question in my mind that was on the minds of many of the Jews then. And back to the Jews when they were traveling through the journeys in the wilderness and all the most difficult times. That was the thing that sustained them. We know it from their words. We see what they said. We see what they said in the most difficult of times. I remember a woman coming to this class who was one of the first victims of the suicide bombings. Well, she survived, but barely. If you remember, it was like one of the first suicide bombings was a Friday afternoon in Ben Yehuda in Jerusalem. So she came over. So a friend brought her over to me after the class, and from a distance, couldn't really tell. She looked actually very beautiful. When she came closer, she was still beautiful, but I could see that her face had gone through some trauma, let's put it that way. So she tells me that she was an American student who went for the summer to Israel, and one Friday she was going to visit. She was going to meet a friend at a cafe. And Ben Yehuda is like the area there, and unfortunately she chose the wrong cafe, and a bomb went off just a few tables away. Many were killed. And she, basically, her face and most of her body was literally torn apart. And they took her to the hospital, and she's months and months that she spent there. Actually, as a matter of fact, her parents were so against her going to Israel in the first place and against her journey that she never told them that she went to Israel. She just said she was going to Europe or whatever. And the first time they saw her, then they knew that she was in Israel, was on CNN, covered in blood. But of course, they came, and that was behind them, and she said she was literally, they had to do all kinds of surgery, her nerve endings, the whole thing was horrific. And her whole face literally had to be rebuilt, basically, besides other parts. She said she had no more smell, no more hearing, one eyesight in one eye was weaker. It was very sad. And she told me she would wake up in the mornings in pain, because she was being drugged up to deal with all the pain involved and the burns, and she would literally cry out to God, "Why did you keep me alive? I came here to Israel to study your Torah, and look what happened to me. I have no life left, I have no dignity left, I have no face left, I have nothing left. Take me." She was extremely angry, and she said this was for months and months. And one morning she woke up. These are her words that she told me, exactly these words. She said, "I woke up in the morning, and for some reason I had like this newfound strength that I was going to fight, and I was going to make it." And these were the words that I'll never forget. She said, "I had this, what was the word? A surge of faith, a very profound faith emerged from within me, and I realized that you can't appreciate faith until you have nothing but faith." In other words, everything after she lost everything is when she realized the power of faith. Now, God forbid, no one should ever have to be tested like that. But I was left with I was amazed by this statement. And I realized that must have been the feeling that many have had who were in hopeless situations and didn't always end up with good endings, happy endings as well. They say about this Holocaust, one of the people who were killed in the Holocaust, they tell the story, I don't know if it's true or not, but right before he was killed, he asked the Nazi animal if he can say something. She said, "Go ahead." And he began to murmur something. And the Nazi said to him, "What are you saying?" He's saying, "I'm saying a prayer to God." And the Nazi began to ridicule him. "God, where's your God? Look what's happening here." And the Jew purportedly told the Nazi, he said, "I'm thanking God for creating me not like you." Now, as I said, whether this happened or not, but the message is very clear. These are people on a journey, and I'm specifically using extreme examples. God should protect us all. We should never have to ever be, and we'll never be in situations like that. But you learn a lot from people in those situations because you learn what they're made of. Today, our test is the exact opposite, actually. Too much prosperity, too much comforts, too much complacency as a result of it. Don't get me wrong. I'm not suggesting we should ever go back to anything like that. Our challenge today is the exact opposite. We have everything. I understand we're going through a recession that's as big as the Depression and all that. But with all that we're going through, it's not that world. And it's not the world of our grandparents. And we're not running from a pogrom or afraid to be sitting here together this evening and there's some informers outside who will inform on us and who knows when we'll be arrested. So with all our so-called discomforts, remember, we've seen a million advertisements. And the bottom line is, our challenge, however, is to understand we also are on the journey. Perhaps our generations past were on the journey that went through difficulties, poverty. And our journey is the journey through so-called freedom, through comforts. And this journey, in a way, is harder because it's so much easier to ignore, so much easier to say, there's no reason, there's no compelling sense of urgency. What urgency is there? Besides, a television show that you missed, or a sports event, or maybe some other things that may be a little more important. What's our urgency? What are we fighting for? Well, we too are on the journey. And it is a journey that began many years ago and continues. And as I said, each one of the 42 steps is another aspect in our lives. And just to repeat again, that you can follow up and look into it. And I'm sure you'll find where you are. In the 42 steps, you can find where you are at this moment. But above all, is to remember that it continues. And it's much larger than any one of us. But when you embrace it, in a way you surrender to your journey. In a good way surrender, you become a free human being. Because it frees you from those illusions of power, of control, of many of the things that keep us trapped by our own vanity and our own egos and our own sense of or need to be in control and think that we have it figured out. That doesn't mean you don't, and it doesn't mean that you have to be completely vulnerable, but it means there's more to the story than you know and that I know. And that's really the bottom line, that the drama of life plays itself out beneath the surface. And when you can understand that, your journey begins to emerge. Now, I could speak for myself personally. I feel this way all the time because I grew up around people, thank God, that understood they were on a journey. And they were extremely passionate about it. At the same time, there was a part of them that realized that there's some things you never really figured out. So it's an interesting mix. And that gave them the deepest type of strength. So I want to wish upon all of us here and all of you, and maybe see me as a friend, that a fellow sojourner, a fellow traveler in this life, that the fact that we intersect here this evening is just a testimony to part of our story, and we had to meet. The question is whether we will use it to its fullest. And we will all learn from each other, me from you and you from me. So I know I've been doing the speaking, but trust me, I learn more from you than you think, even though you're just sitting there. Not just sitting, I mean listening. And it's a deeper story that's more than just words anyway. So I want to just say is that I thank you all. And this class itself has been a journey that's going now for I guess over 25 years, 27 years. Here we have a young man here. Well, he was a younger man then, Jeff, specimen A, who I met when he was 16 years old, right? And it's been a journey, because everyone here, whether you know it or not, is here because a friend before you brought you or suggested it. We never advertised, so it's word of mouth. And it's interesting because when I began, it was two people who came to see me, looking for some spiritual inspiration. It was in Brooklyn. It was in 1982. It was before the PC. There were no fax machines, no emails, no cell phones. We had nothing. That's a joke. We had typewriters. I used to use a typewriter. Anybody's ever seen a typewriter? Huh? Yeah, okay. That just testifies to your age. Today it's in museums. Typewriters are in museums with whiteout and all this stuff. So I remember getting the first computer in 82, 83, first PC. Well, before IBM, there was the Northgates and the Disgates, I forget, or the Commodores. Anyway, and we began to just get together every evening. Every Thursday night it was then. And then they asked if they could bring somebody along, and they brought another person. Most of the people then were from the music and entertainment industry. And one friend brought an ex-friend, and you are all an extension of that. So there's a certain journey-like element to this. I just hope that we stay in the same journey, meaning we see each other. But it's still a continuing journey, and there's something powerful when there's a continuum like that. So I wish upon all of you that the things that are good in your life, you should be able to say 5 years down the road, 10 years, that you're still part of it. Because it's so easy to have fleeting moments, even good moments, but they don't stay. How many things stay? how many things are permanent in this impermanent world. So I want to thank all of you for that, and thank all those that preceded you. And I stay in touch with everybody, hopefully. And now there's also the internet, of course. And may everybody be blessed with a very pleasant journey, not just tonight and tomorrow, but the rest of your time in this stage of the Odyssey. And please see me and my team, you can say Velvel and Jeff and everyone else, as here to help in any given way that we can. If you would like and do not receive the weekly emails that I send out, I'd be happy to send them to you. Just leave it here in front. And finally, I want to say that this class, in addition to be dedicated to Hillel Pevsner, also by Mark Belinsky in honor of the yahrzeit of his uncle, Chaim Aron ben Sion, on the 22nd of Tammuz, and in honor of his birthday on the 21st of Tammuz. So Mazel Tov for that. If anybody wants to dedicate a class in honor of anybody, please see me or Velvel back there. And I should add that tomorrow night Philip will continue the journey in his own way, tomorrow night. And I will also announce that not this Wednesday, next Wednesday I will be here. No plans, not Lima, not Vietnam, nowhere. But in 2 weeks from now will be Tisha B'Av, which, as I said, is the saddest day of the calendar. It's going to be Wednesday night. So we're going to have a special program. We will have, I call it a class or not, but we'll definitely do, there's a service that's done, the reading of the Lamentations, but I'll also explain, and we'll have a Tisha B'Av style get-together, let's put it that way. So we'll announce it in the emails, but I'm just giving you a heads up in case you're interested or want to bring some friends. So Tisha B'Av has its own particular part of the journey. It's a sad part, but nevertheless very meaningful. And we will do that. That's 2 Wednesdays from tonight, right? Not next, but the following one. And next Wednesday night we shall continue the journey. But the 6 days in between are also part of it. And God bless you all to illuminate and warm your environments. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure, honor to speak to you.